I'm Alex Larson, dietitian, Ironman finisher, and host of Endurance Eats, the podcast where we break down the science of endurance nutrition and turn it into clear, practical nutrition advice to revolutionize how you think about fueling your body. So grab a seat, or keep moving if you're out training, and let's get started. Welcome back to the Endurance Eats podcast. I'm your host, Alex Larson, and as promised in season 1, I brought you an episode dedicated to my fellow women, the females, the athletes who menstruate. And just wait until you hear the expertise and background on my guest today. I am interviewing Dr. Abbie Smith-Ryan, who is a professor in the Department of Exercise and Sports Science at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, where she also serves as the Associate Chair for Research, the Director of the Applied Physiology Lab. She's an active researcher in the field of body composition, metabolism, sports nutrition, and exercise performance with a special interest in female health. She contributes to a current body of scientific literature with over 200 peer-reviewed manuscripts, a number of scholastic books and book chapters, and international and national presentations. She's a former collegiate distance runner, a mom of 2 young kids, and she is so passionate about using nutrition and dietary supplements to optimize health and quality of life. Because Abbie and I had so much to cover, we are breaking this episode up into 2 episodes. So today we're going to cover menstruation, metabolism, body composition, and then our next episode will be dedicated specifically to that midlife phase of transitioning into the stages of menopause. So make sure to bookmark, share these episodes with others. And if you happen to share them on social media, you can tag me at Alex Larson Nutrition. But here we go. Let's talk all things menstruation, metabolism, and body comp with Dr. Abbie Smith-Ryan. Abbie, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here. I have a million questions. So I'm just preparing you. Are you ready to get into this?
I am. Thanks for letting me join here.
Yay. Okay. First of all, tell me a little bit more about your research focus over the years and what's drawn you to these areas of study.
So I would say over the last 7 years, my research has focused mostly on women really in the menstruating years across through to menopause, but we still evaluate many men as well. So my research is really focused on exercise and nutrition to optimize body composition, metabolism, and cardiovascular health. And another really important angle is to explore feasible ways to do this. We all know exercise and nutrition is good, but how do you do it in a way that we can actually fit in our day-to-day?
Yes, I preach that every day. I'm it's not just about trying to eat really healthy. It's about making it be something that's sustainable and works with your unique lifestyle. Because you're a mom, I'm a mom. We're busy. We got time is a hot commodity for sure.
Absolutely. We don't have to be perfect.
Yes. Thank you. So real quick, because I get asked this a lot and I'm wondering if our answers align with this. Is it important to adjust your nutrition to your menstrual cycle as an athlete?
I would say most of us just need to focus on eating. So that would not be the first place I would start. I would like to make space that there are many women that, experience lots of side effects from their menstrual cycle. And I think nutrition is a really good tool to help starting point with things like inflammation and cramps, etc. But that would not be my number one target for women by any means.
I would agree with that. I feel we got to first work on the low hanging fruit, the foundation, and then that really specific fueling around your menstrual cycle is very high hanging fruit. It's stuff that for me, I don't even touch. I'm let's just keep it really simple. Do you feel athletic performance is really strongly influenced by your cycle?
Well, I would say, if anything, I think nutrition can be a really good buffer for any potential changes that we might see. So if I were then to say, okay, if someone, first and foremost, women, it really helps to track your menstrual cycle because everyone is so different. Some women do experience pretty severe side effects that would then impact exercise. So for instance, I know some women that have severe cramps that then would impact their ability to train. And so then you might want to start to modify, or I would think, again, more about that nutritional component. The other element I would say is from the research and the research that we've done, women can perform regardless of the phase of their cycle, which is important, meaning you can compete regardless of phase. However, sometimes we might see different fuel use or recovery differences, things like soreness. And that's where I think nutrition should be a bigger role of, if you're someone particularly, let's say in the luteal phase, that you might have more soreness, then that would be something just to really optimize nutrient timing, especially if you've just had a hard race or a hard workout. So not the end all be all, but I do think it's a good conversation point, especially for women. It does seem in that luteal phase, there's some differences related to increased energy expenditure and some soreness. So that would just be a good excuse. Like if you are hungrier, there's a physiological rationale. You may consider having some additional calories.
Yeah, I do find that in that luteal phase, so that's like post-ovulation, before you have your period, that phase in there, because your metabolism is a little higher, you might be a little bit more hungry, and people kind of panic during that time. I'm like, no, actually, this is kind of normal. So let's lean into that so that you don't get to those last days before your period where you're just like overly starving and having the kind of those almost like bingey moments that are associated with the standard PMS kind of things.
Absolutely. And a lot of women experience some GI distress during that time period. So again, it's just understanding your body and maybe altering things that help you. And it might be different, but thinking about foods that might cause more bloating and gas, those are things that might be more relevant in the luteal phase, and especially around competition. You want to avoid that.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than like being in those first couple days of your period on race day when you have like the period shits. Like the worst timing ever. Like, I'm always like looking at the calendar. I'm like, when's my race? I'm like, how's this going? I'm like, okay, I think we're going to be okay. It's just that's just always my one thing I dread, especially for like a running race.
100%, which is, again, little things can make a difference. Is that something you always want to stress? No, but you might change some small dietary things to help make you feel a little bit better.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I've heard you talk before about muscle quality, and I think you just posted recently on Instagram too, showing some research studies looking at that. Can you talk more about why you're studying specifically the quality of muscle in women?
Yeah, we actually have some really cool data in endurance athletes on this topic too. So muscle quality is essentially estimating the amount of fat and connective tissue within the muscle. So I always describe of like we have different levels of quality of muscle, and typically as we age, we get more fat and connective tissue infiltration. Also, individuals that are more obese tend to have a lower quality muscle, which means more fat infiltration, more connective tissue. And it's just really important. We want a higher quality muscle as we age. It's related to metabolic health. It's related to even bone health. What we do see is with some endurance athletes and even swimmers that if you have trained for a long period of time, you naturally have more fat within the muscle. That's a little different than what we traditionally call muscle quality, because that fat is an adaptation to allow us to oxidize more fat. But we can still see it the same. Like we actually have one study specifically in endurance runners to try and explore stress fracture incidents. It's a common more in endurance athletes. And what the data showed us is that it wasn't a bone difference between individuals that had stress fracture and non-stress fracture, but it seemed to be more of a muscle quality issue. Meaning that those individuals that had a stress fracture, they had a lower muscle quality, so more of that fatty and connective tissue infiltration. And this was actually in our D1 athletes. And so the takeaway from that is it was clear that these individuals needed to do more strength training, not just endurance running. That strength training can allow for that greater muscle quality, which then has a protective effect against bone. And so it really demonstrated, like for injury prevention, muscle quality is also a really important component.
Oh, that's so fascinating. And it makes complete sense that it's not, nutritionally, when athletes are underfueled, they're more prone to injury and stress fracture, and that muscle quality and quantity is obviously very directly tied to nutrition as well and strength training.
Yeah. And I think, right now there's a lot of conversation about muscle, which I actually think is great, particularly for our endurance athletes. But the best way I also describe it is individuals that are very large, our overweight and obese individuals actually have more muscle than our smaller people. But that doesn't mean that muscle is all metabolically high quality. They tend to have a lower quality muscle. And so it's really more about how do we optimize the amount of muscle and the ability to contract and utilize all of those muscle fibers. And that comes down to muscle quality.
Fascinating. Is there a way to assess your muscle quality? Like, is there like non-clinical ways that people could get that assessment done, or how's that observed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in the lab, typically we measure it with MRI or a CT scan or an ultrasound. So I don't know if there's any non-clinical way, but I will tell you, with all of the work that we've done, typically if you are someone that, is pre-diabetic or diabetic or has some, insulin insensitivity that or high lipids, that's usually also related to muscle quality. And I say that because it's one thing that we actually can take a little bit of control of thinking about framing our bodies in a way to optimize and improve muscle quality can also help metabolic health. So it's more of an indirect indicator. If you're someone that has some of those preclinical or clinical markers of metabolic, dysfunction, I would assume some of that muscle quality is also lower.
I would agree with that too. So let's get into metabolism then, because when I asked my Instagram audience, I'm like, hey, what questions do you have for Abbie? And there's a lot of questions about weight loss. A lot of questions. Like basically someone said anything regarding weight loss. But I want to talk about metabolism and body composition, because I feel like we need to understand that if we're going to help athletes see some of that weight loss that they're looking for. It's really common to see, from my standpoint, athletes who menstruate that have a very long-standing history of some sort of like yo-yo dieting or crash dieting in attempts to lose weight. What are like the negative long-term effects of like that type of restrictive eating?
Yeah, it's a somewhat complicated topic, but hopefully I can dial it down and give. And I am a former distance runner, and it has led to some of my passion in this topic. Because if you are an active person, male or female, the whole goal of exercise is for us to have these mitochondrial adaptations. Remember, mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. Mm-hmm. And that just means that we're more efficient at producing energy, which is great for exercise. That means that we can go longer on the fuel that we have, and you can perform. It counteracts our goal with weight loss and metabolism. It makes us very efficient, just meaning that we now need fewer calories to do the same amount of work. And when you combine exercise with fuel restriction or that yo-yo dieting, it makes our mitochondria even more efficient. And so then if our goal is weight loss, your mitochondria are doing what it's supposed to do. They are very efficient. They're providing fuel even when you are not. So it creates this environment where the body's not going to lose weight. It's going to utilize the fuel and kind of slowly adapt to that. And the way I like to think about it, we actually wrote a paper about metabolic adaptation from an athlete perspective. And I wrote that because one, I worked we use a bodybuilding model a lot, because it's a model that they have these severe yo-yo dieting practices. But a lot of times this happens even without thinking of, like, if you're increasing training volume and maintaining your caloric intake, a lot of times you're not losing weight, you're just optimizing performance. But over time, if you do that, especially as we get older, then what I find, even for me, I'm a distance runner, of like, I can perform the same amount of activity on pretty low fuel and my body composition doesn't change because I'm so efficient. That's great for exercise, not so great for body composition and weight loss goals.
How I think of metabolic adaptation, and let me know if I'm on the right track here. So let's say, and I'll give an example. I had a kind of an ultra runner that came, started working with me like 2021, and he was almost 50. So I think he's around 49 years old. And he had slowly gained weight over probably 5 years or so. So he was probably over that time just a couple pounds a year. And so he was probably 20 pounds heavier than he was a few years prior. He was looking to lose some weight, but still be able to run all of his miles. He's like, I'm pretty much always in shape for like a 50K, Alex. I'm like, oh, okay. Like that's like, that's just kind of how ultra runners are. They're always in shape for a race. So when I looked at his nutrition of what he was eating on average, it was around like 1900 calories a day. I calculated his needs to be about 1,000 calories more than that a day. And so I'm like, okay, in my mind, his body has adapted to being very efficient at running all of those miles and living his lifestyle at 1900 calories. Why he probably, maybe on days where he maybe ate a lot more than that, would see like that little bit of gradual weight gain over time. And so what we did was we gradually worked his intake up to almost close to maintenance. And within 4 to 6 weeks, he had dropped like quite a bit of weight. I mean, it was probably average like a pound a week. To people that are told, eat less, exercise more, that makes no sense to them. But to me, I'm like, no, we have to get that metabolism back up to a happy spot. Get your body is probably in a really stressful state trying to like survive and thrive running all of those miles at 1900 calories. And it's going to be much more likely to let go of that excess body fat when it's in this higher metabolic status. Am I explaining that right?
Yeah. I mean, I would call that more of a reverse diet of slowly increasing calories. I will say it sounds like your scenario is a really perfect example. I think the problem is most of the time people don't respond quite so quickly. And then it's hard to buy into of how am I supposed to eat more when my goal is weight loss. And so it's reframing that's honestly why I spend a lot of time with body composition measurements, because it's not about weight loss. It's about body recomposition. And oftentimes it's increasing calories very slowly, but also looking at the type of calories that you're consuming. There's a lot of benefit around modifying the carb to protein ratio, especially for endurance athletes. So you're getting that metabolic advantage while also trying to maintain that caloric intake or increase caloric intake while just weight maintenance. Try and put weight loss on the shelf for a minute. And then often people do lose weight as they slowly increase those calories. There's a lot of good data in more of like eating disorder populations that just says like sometimes it can take years, a year or two, for that metabolic response to be more normal. And that's very much dependent on how many times you've dieted, how long you've been restrictive. And so it is a different mindset of how do you get someone to kind of eat an adequate amount to help repair that metabolism. It's really just to get it back to functioning. And I think even now we're seeing with this intermittent fasting approach of, there's a lot of debate about whether metabolism slows as we age. There's so much more to it than age, but it seems like the number one impact of a slow metabolism is fewer meals and more restriction, which is really, to me, an important message because, and sometimes I even have to remind myself of like, no, it's actually better just to have the meal and that will help over time. And so, I think that message is really important. We actually just need to fuel more and then optimize what we're eating can have a bigger impact on our weight loss and body composition goals.
Oh my God. I love you, Abbie. The fact that you mentioned intermittent fasting, my heart is so happy because, I call intermittent fasting as a joke. I call it randomized starving because I just, for endurance athletes, I'm like, it just doesn't go well with the endurance athlete lifestyle and trying to go long hours without eating. But I'm really happy that you said that can be more harmful to do that longer fasting in terms of for metabolic health and for body composition. So, oh my God, thank you. This is so great. You mentioned carb to protein ratio. Tell me more about that.
And this is not everyone. And I think it depends on who you talk to. But like, I remember I would, when I went out for cross country or endurance, it's because you could eat more pasta, like it was, or you needed more carbohydrates, which is true. If you are doing endurance exercise, you absolutely need a sufficient amount of carbohydrate. But I think sometimes endurance runners focus just on carbohydrate. And then it is hard to have endurance goals and weight loss goals at the same time. And so then you start talking about, okay, well, how can we optimize both? And that's, to me, where some of this nutrient timing you pay a little bit more attention to. But for the carb to protein ratio, this is actually the classic chocolate milk study. Most people know to consume chocolate milk post-exercise because it helps with glycogen repletion, specifically with endurance exercise. Chocolate milk is typically a 4-to-1 carb to protein ratio. So let's just assume 40 grams of carbohydrates, 10 grams of protein. If my goal is body composition, then a lower carb to protein ratio, something like a 2-to-1, and for women it's about a 1.5-to-1. So that would be 20 grams of carbs, 10 grams of protein, seems to be better for that body recomposition. And a lot of this work, some of the classic work is done by Don Layman. And so that would just be, instead of having chocolate milk post-exercise, just have white milk post-exercise. Or thinking about when we sit down to have a meal, making sure, yes, have your pasta. Let's say I have 50 grams of carbohydrate from my pasta. Make sure I have 25 grams of protein along with it. That's a 2-to-1 carb to protein ratio. And I like this approach because it teaches people also how to eat, of like, yes, absolutely don't restrict your carbohydrates, but don't just eat carbohydrates. Add that other protein component there, and it helps with satiety, recovery, and some of that metabolic.
Absolutely. I have this, if you've ever heard me like present to like athlete groups, I had played this little game, and the presentation is called Make It a Meal, where I'll take like a standard, like common meal, like a bowl of pasta, you know, and I'm like, let's make it a meal. And I might add like some like lean meatballs on there for extra protein, and maybe have like a side salad with some chicken on it, or like some fruit on there for some micronutrients and color, and like making it a much more balanced meal makes it more satisfying, more nutritionally diverse, and it like supports recovery and performance and body composition goals, like all in one. So,
but it's more food,
and it's more
people
food.
Can't. Yeah, but I think sometimes people have a hard time with that. So like, hey, you want me to actually eat more? Yes, I do want you to eat more, because over time it actually helps with hunger hormones and recovery and sleep and all of those things.
You have better energy throughout the day. You don't get like the little munchies every 2 hours. Like some athletes that are like, I'm constantly hungry. I'm like, yeah, it's because your meals are stingy. Like you need to have a solid meal, and then you can go 3-4 hours and feel really satisfied, have great energy, and be a more productive human.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, I think that's where some of this fasting comes in. For busy people that are also exercising, it's hard to prioritize nutrition.
So hard.
It's much easier just not to eat. And I think that's what you have to like make space for. Of like, there are some days personally, like I don't eat enough, but my goal is not weight loss. And so like, I have to know that that's what I'm sacrificing. Like I'm just, but if my goal is weight loss or body recomposition, then my nutrition priorities go up, and I'm actually eating more frequently and spending more time. And so it comes down to priorities, and those are where, your goals have to align, and just know like there is more effort and more eating to it. And some people don't want to do that, which is fine. You can also train. And that's where even some of our nutrient timing work has come in. And it's such a contentious topic right now, which is mind blowing, of like, you should eat when you want to eat and when you can eat. But if you're trying to take exercise goals and life and do both, optimizing what you eat around exercise can have a big impact on just soreness and, even training volume. And that's where we've spent some time to really say like, well, what would have a big impact in these small behavior changes to try and get where we need to get, when time is an essence.
I mean, I love the intuitive eating concept, but for athletes that have very specific goals, we have to combine it with intentional eating practices. I think there has to be both. We like to all be in like specific camps, or like, oh, I'm an intuitive eater, or I do this diet. I'm like, no, like we have to take little bits and pieces to make it work for the individual.
Yeah. And I think the one thing people forget, I love intuitive eating, and I think that
Yeah. So in talking about nutrition timing, I have found with our team that shifting our athletes to front loading their nutrition earlier in the day is very helpful for body composition. A great example is a client of mine that started with me like mid 2024. I worked with her for about 7 months, and that entire time was shifting because she runs a big company, so she's very, very busy, and so she hardly would eat during the day. I think total, honestly, she was eating maybe 1,000 calories a day. Like, because by the time she got to the end of the day, she'd just have like her normal dinner, maybe snack in a little bit in the evening, and then start over the next day and hardly eat like breakfast or lunch or any snacks because she just was like so focused on her business. Like that was her baby. And so we shifted her to starting with breakfast, having some sort of lunch, and really prioritizing herself during the day to take those moments to eat a meal and start bringing those calories slowly up. I'm like, okay, so you're taking like maybe 1,000 calories in a day. I need you to be taking more like, 1,800, 1,700, 1,800 a day. So we gradually worked her up, but then shifted a lot of that nutrition to earlier on in the day. And she's like, my energy levels are so much better, but she didn't lose any weight. And she was disappointed, but also knew like it was just part of trusting the process. So then finally towards the end, once I think about 6 months in, she's like, I'm starting to see the weight come down a little bit. And I'm like, oh, thank God. Like, but it was such a process for her to figure out behaviorally how to shift and prioritize herself during the day, but then get that metabolism up and start gradually seeing those body comp things happen.
Yeah, and I do think that this is one thing, it's not just female specific, but there is this element, we all have more willpower during the day. And it's not even willpower, but it is, especially some of the brain changes as we age of like, yeah, we can keep going, especially as women, and run off 1,000 calories a day. But then there's no energy at night. And often hunger hormones are then elevated. A classic example of this is when people, once they start eating dinner, they can't stop or they want to continually eat, which is not optimally fueling. And so you're absolutely right. Getting people to eat earlier in the day not only gives them more energy, which can fuel training and ultimately help over time, but there's a brain barrier there. And how, especially if you're used to running on little fuel, there is this kind of response that's reported in the literature. And oftentimes I feel like you short-term have more energy when you're not eating. It's very short-term. It's a brain component, which is often reported with eating disorders. But it is absolutely that mind shift of eating during the day, getting that metabolism going. It requires calories to break down that food. You're getting those nutrients that ultimately helps over time. But it's sometimes hard to buy into.
Well, Abbie, we're going to pause here and we're going to shift and we're going to table this conversation for the next episode. And we're going to talk in the next episode about perimenopause and menopause and all of that good stuff, because I have lots of questions about that. So, Abbie, thanks so much for today. And we are going to have you back here for the next episode.
All right, can't wait.
A huge shout out to Dr. Abbie Smith-Ryan for sharing her expertise. What an incredible conversation. I can't wait for you to hear the rest next week. If today's episode sparked some aha moments for you, or even a sigh of relief that you're not alone, this is exactly why I do what I do, and it's why I created my one-on-one nutrition coaching program to support endurance athletes like you in feeling your best both on and off the race course. So if you're ready to stop second-guessing your nutrition and start seeing real results, you can head to alexlarsonnutrition.com and apply. And as always, if you loved this episode, leave a rating, a review, and share it on your social channels, and you can tag me at Alex Larson Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode.